BlackRock's Larry Fink says negative interest rates are biggest crisis in the world. Fink joins bond guru Bill Gross in criticizing central bank policies. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink on Thursday called negative interest rates the biggest crisis globally, warning that they are hurting savers, retirees, pension funds, and insurance companies. Fink's comments on CNBC echoed views expressed recently by bond guru Bill Gross of Janus Capital Group, who claimed that negative interest rates in Europe and Japan could roil the global economy by upending the business model of the banking sector. Gross went as far as to claim that bond investors that buy bonds with negative yields are thinking and managing assets at the grade school level, as they do not understand the absurdity and consequences of negative bond yields, when an investor pays money for the privilege of lending it to governments. On Thursday, BlackRock's chief took the argument a step further, calling ultra-low rates in the U.S. and negative interest rates overseas the global crisis hurting pension funds and insurance companies, which are unable to meet their liabilities, as they are receiving anemic returns on their bond investments. Over 70% of our clients are retirement plans and insurance plans. Our clients are in pain, Fink said. His comments came as BlackRock Incorporated, BLK, plus 1.90% reported Thursday net profit in its latest quarter fell mainly due to market-driven lower fees. The world's largest money manager said it was restructuring in the quarter in a move to streamline and simplify our organization and drive efficiencies. Fink blamed the poor results on market volatility. When you think about what happened in the first quarter, the markets fell double digits, Fink said. When you have that type of volatility, you have uncertainty from our clients. The clients are pulling back. Talking about central banks' efforts to spur growth, Fink said that monetary easing, once presented as a temporary measure, has turned into the new normal. I don't call 7, 8 years temporary. I don't see how that still has a positive impact, he said, adding that global markets have become too dependent on central bankers to boost the global economies. To make matters worse, those policies have the opposite effect on the economy than intended, Fink said in his annual letter to shareholders published Sunday. Instead of monetary policy, Fink called on political leaders to step in and provide fiscal reform, echoing the views recently expressed by Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein, who said he sees room for continued fiscal policy expansion to deal with the potential of economic slowdown in some economies. In his letter to shareholders, J.P. Morgan Chase & Co. Chief Executive Officer Jamie Dimon also expressed fears in March that negative interest rates could have a lot of unintended consequences that we don't understand. But last week Dimon said he isn't worried that U.S. policymakers might resort to negative interest rates, citing the healthy labor market and growing consumer strength. Financial crises in comparison, this time is different. Seeing that it has been a year since the update to Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff's great work on financial crises, I thought it would be a good idea to check in on how the U.S. is doing relative to these other historical crises. First, the Great Recession is clearly the worst post-World War II business cycle in the U.S. as evident by comparing job losses. However, when the Great Recession is compared not to other U.S. cycles but to the Big Five financial crises and the U.S. Great Depression, thanks to U.S. Treasury for adding that to the graph, the current cycle actually compares pretty favorably. This is likely due to the coordinated global response to the immediate crises in late 2008 and early 2009. While the initial path of both the global and U.S. economies in 2008 and 2009 effectively matched the early years of the Great Depression, or worse, the strong policy response employed by nearly all major economies, both monetary and fiscal, helped stop the economic freefall. Finally, the last graph is a new one and compares unemployment rates across these same crises. While the current U.S. cycle rate effectively doubled from 4.5% to 10.0%, many other crises gains were even larger. In fact, the percentage increase, as opposed to percentage point increase, in the unemployment rate for all crises except Japan were larger than the U.S. Great Recession. Even Norway's unemployment rate, which topped out at just over 6%, represented a near tripling of the pre-crisis rate of 2.1%. Note that the unemployment rate peak used here is the 12-month average preceding each crisis. The following provides an update on the great research that Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff conducted regarding the build-up and subsequent bust of historical financial crises. While their work on crises was largely conducted in the time period leading up to and directly after the financial meltdown in late 2008, there does not appear to be any updates now that the U.S. economy has been in technical recovery for over 2 years at this point. Some of the facts and figures cited in this time is different, and the author's academic papers were still a work in progress at publication date given that events were ongoing. With the benefit of hindsight, a longer time span and revised economic data always a luxury, I have recreated and updated some of M.S. Reinhart and Mr. Rogoff's work. Specifically, what follows PDF full version is based on their draft paper for an American Economic Association presentation in January 2009, The Aftermath of Financial Crises. In order to not bury the lead, first up is a quick summary of the U.S. current experience relative to historical financial crises, followed later by graphs for each individual measure. All told, the recent U.S. financial crisis looks very similar to the historical crises as detailed by Reinhart and Rogoff, just your garden variety. Severe financial crisis, if you will. Across each of the 5 measures discussed in the Aftermath paper, the current U.S. experience is of the same magnitude. However, the U.S. labor market has performed better than for the previous big 5 crises, as identified by Reinhart and Rogoff, in terms of job loss and the return to peak timeline. The question that naturally follows and is not answered here is why does the current U.S. cycle measure up in terms of the aftermath of financial crises except in the percentage of employment loss relative to Spain, Norway, Finland and Sweden? It appears that the U.S. did something right. Is it as simple as ARRA? Is it TARP and the backstopping of the financial industry? Is it the fact that, more or less, the world had a coordinated response in late 2008/early 2009 for expansionary fiscal and monetary policies? Given the following historical facts averages that Reinhart and Rogoff found in their research, the purpose here is to find out how the current U.S. cycle compares. Through June 2011, the S&P/Case-Shiller Home Price Index, either the 10-city or 20-city composite, has declined 38% in real terms since mid-2006, while the historical average saw a decline of 35.5% over 6 years. There has been no definitive or sustained upturn in home values to date, so this calculation is still a work in progress, as prices may fall further or the decline may last longer than the current 5 years. The historical average for percentage point increases in the unemployment rate was 7. over nearly 5 years. The U.S. employment rate this cycle increased 5.7 percentage points from 4.4 to 10.1% over approximately 3 years. Real per capita GDP typically declines 9.3%, while the U.S. fell 6.35% from 2007 Q4 through 2009 Q2. Note that this calculation does include the most recent DEA revisions. During the first 3 years after a crisis, public sector debt increases, on average, slightly more than 86%. Using the U.S. Treasury's debt held by the public figures, in the U.S. real debt has increased 78% from July 2008 through July 2011. One item not addressed in their aftermath paper is the actual level of employment and its large declines during and after crises. The following graphs provide context for how far U.S. employment has contracted during the most recent business cycle. The first graph is the standard U.S. employment return to peak, which compares the U.S. performance over post-World War II recessions. The current cycle is termed the Great Recession or Lesser Depression, depending upon whom you ask, and with good reason. It is clearly the outlier in terms of job loss. However, in the context of the Big Five financial crises, the current U.S. cycle suddenly does not look quite as dire. Notice how the x-axis, how long it takes to return to peak levels of employment, is measured in years, not months like the first graph. All told, the recent U.S. financial crisis looks very similar to the historical crises as detailed by Reinhart and Rogoff, Your Garden Variety, Severe Financial Crisis. However, the U.S. labor market has performed better than for the previous Big Five crises, and Japan's economic and employment experience over the past 20 years is unique in its own right. Larry Fink says negative interest rates are biggest crisis in the world. Fink joins bond guru Bill Gross in criticizing central bank policies. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink on Thursday called negative interest rates the biggest crisis globally. BlackRock's in Europe and Japan could roil the global economy by upending the business model of the banking sector. Gross went as far as to claim that bond investors that buy bonds with negative yields are thinking and managing assets at the grade school level, as they do not understand, warning that they are hurting savers, retirees, pension funds and insurance companies. Fink's comments on CNBC echoed views expressed recently by bond guru Bill Gross of Janus Capital Group, who claimed that negative interest rates and the absurdity and consequences of negative bond yields, when an investor pays money for the privilege of lending it to governments. On Thursday, BlackRock's chief took the argument a step further, calling ultra-low rates in the U.S. and